At 68 years old, Bishop Noel Jones has finally broken his silence, and what he admitted left both supporters and critics in shock. For years, quiet whispers trailed his ministry, questions were raised, and speculation grew louder with each passing season. But now, the truth is out, and it's exactly what so many had suspected all along. What Bishop Jones confirmed doesn't only affect how people view him personally, it could reshape the way his entire ministry is remembered. For decades, Bishop Noel Jones has stood as one of the most talked about figures in today's church world. Admired for his fiery preaching, bold personality, and unmatched ability to draw massive crowds. Jones has been in the spotlight for years, but that same spotlight also brought constant scrutiny. Over time, questions piled up about his leadership, his private life, and the way things were handled behind the scenes in his ministry. Now, at 68, Bishop Noel Jones has finally put an end to the silence, addressing what so many suspected but could never say for sure. This recent confirmation doesn't just settle years of speculation, it forces us to take a closer look at how influence, age, and responsibility overlap in the journey of a spiritual leader. In this video, we're digging into the truth about Noel Jones' ministry, what he revealed, the history that led here, and why so many are now saying, "We always knew this was the case."
But here's where it gets even more compelling. This revelation isn't simply about one man. It's about the bigger conversations surrounding faith, leadership, and legacy within the modern church. So stick with me until the end, because by the time we're finished, you'll understand why this moment is larger than Bishop Jones himself, and why his ministry will never be looked at in the same way again. To see why Bishop Noel Jones' confirmation at 68 has caused so much discussion. We need to first rewind and understand how he rose to become such a towering name in the church. His path has never been just about preaching, it has been a journey of influence, resilience, and yes, controversy. Born in Spanish Town, Jamaica, Noel Jones moved to the U.S. as a child, later stepping into ministry in his early 20s. His preaching style immediately made him stand out. While many pastors were calm and measured, Jones was fiery, intellectual, and intense. He didn't just deliver sermons, he demanded attention. Those who sat under his voice often described the experience as more than a sermon, it was an encounter. By the time he became pastor of the City of Refuge Church in California, Jones was already establishing himself as a major force in Pentecostal and charismatic circles. Under his leadership, what was once a modest church began to grow rapidly. His gift of blending traditional biblical teaching with modern-day relevance made him a favorite across diverse groups, from lifelong believers to young people searching for meaning in a complicated world. But what truly pushed Jones into the national spotlight was his charisma. He had a unique ability to mix raw honesty with profound theology, taking on subjects many preachers wouldn't dare touch. He spoke openly about real struggles, personal battles, and the challenges of living out faith in today's world. To many, he was not only a pastor but also a relatable figure, someone who understood what it meant to deal with success, failure, temptation, and redemption. Naturally, his rise was never just about the sermons he preached. Bishop Noel Jones grew into a recognizable figure in wider culture, appearing in documentaries, major conferences, and even the hit reality series Preachers of LA. That show, while highly controversial, introduced him to millions of viewers who may have never walked into his church. Some applauded his authenticity. Others, however, criticized the blending of ministry with reality television. Either way, the result was the same. Noel Jones was no longer only a preacher. He had become a household name whenever conversations about faith leaders came up. Yet, along with fame came speculation. His age, his health, his personal decisions, and even his approach to leadership all became ongoing subjects of debate. For decades, questions lingered. Could he continue leading at the same relentless pace? Would he ever directly confront the controversies surrounding his ministry? And was there more happening behind the pulpit than people realized? Those unanswered questions paved the way for the moment when, at 68 years old, Bishop Noel Jones finally confirmed what many had suspected all along. But before we get to that startling revelation, we have to examine the suspicions and tensions that have been building for years. His recent admission didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the culmination of decades of rumors, whispers, and quiet observations from both critics and loyal supporters. Which leads us into the next chapter of this story, the long-standing doubts surrounding Noel Jones's ministry and why so many were waiting for him to finally speak the truth. For decades, Bishop Noel Jones has been praised as one of the most gifted preachers of his generation. But with admiration also came a cloud of speculation that followed him wherever he went. Some suspicions were spoken about quietly among church members, while others became heated debates across social media and news outlets. The questions varied, but they carried one common thread. Something about his ministry always felt incomplete, unclear, or deliberately left unsaid. One of the biggest suspicions centered on his personal life. Though Bishop Jones often admitted he was far from perfect, many wondered how his choices outside the pulpit might affect the role he carried inside of it. The reality series Preachers of LA only fueled that fire, offering glimpses into his private world that seemed to spark more questions than answers. His bachelor lifestyle well into his senior years, his public remarks about marriage, and his complicated relationship status all became points of discussion. Many quietly asked, how does a man of God reconcile his humanity with his spiritual calling? And was Bishop Jones intentionally avoiding certain truths about his life and his leadership role? Another point of suspicion revolved around his health and endurance in ministry. As he entered his late 60s, people began noticing the physical toll preaching and pastoring took on him. Clips circulated of him looking fatigued or slowing down during long sermons. Those images raised speculation. Was Bishop Jones still strong enough to lead such a massive congregation? Would he eventually hand over the pulpit? Or was he determined to keep leading until the very end? Beyond his personal matters, questions also emerged about his leadership style. Bishop Jones was celebrated for his brilliance, but also recognized as a strong, centralized leader. While many members admired his direct way of leading, others quietly worried that the church had become too reliant on him alone. What would happen to City of Refuge if something ever happened to him? Did he have a clear succession plan, or was that yet another issue left unspoken? Financial transparency became another quiet source of speculation. As with many large, high-profile ministries, critics began questioning how the resources were being managed, especially as Bishop Jones's influence grew and his platforms expanded. Although no evidence of wrongdoing was ever proven, the mere presence of unanswered questions kept fueling chatter, especially in an age filled with scandals involving pastors and megachurch finances. Naturally, people grew suspicious. And these doubts weren't confined to critics alone. Even loyal supporters admitted that at times they too wondered whether Bishop Jones was deliberately keeping certain matters close to himself. He was eloquent and powerful in the pulpit, but outside of it, there were moments when he left important issues untouched. That silence, whether intentional or not, created space for rumors to grow. And perhaps the greatest question of all revolved around legacy. For years, people asked, what would Bishop Noel Jones ultimately be remembered for? Would his reputation rest on his unforgettable preaching? Or would history recall the lingering, unresolved questions that followed him everywhere? Would he be seen as a spiritual giant or as a leader who left too much in the shadows? At 68 years old, those questions became impossible to ignore. Both those closest to him, as well as observers who had followed his ministry from afar, were waiting for clarity. And when Bishop Jones finally spoke up, confirming what many had suspected for years, it felt like decades of tension had finally risen to the surface. But here's the twist: what he admitted wasn't only about himself. It exposed something much broader about ministry leadership itself and the heavy cost of carrying influence for so long. And that's exactly where this story takes a turn no one anticipated. In the next section, we'll look at the breaking point, the moment when Bishop Noel Jones finally chose to stop sidestepping the rumors and openly confronted the truth that had been whispered about for so many years. After decades of speculation, whispers, and unanswered questions, the moment finally arrived. At the age of 68, Bishop Noel Jones decided to stop avoiding the suspicions and to face them directly. For his followers, this wasn't just another sermon or public remark. It became a historic moment. People leaned in, waiting to see if what they had believed for years would at last be confirmed. And that is exactly what happened. Bishop Jones acknowledged what many had long suspected, that the weight of ministry, his personal struggles, and the realities of age had finally reached a point where they could no longer be pushed aside. In his own words, he admitted that the enormous pressures of carrying such a vast responsibility had taken their toll on him physically, Emotionally and spiritually, for a man who had always appeared larger than life, this marked a rare and powerful moment of vulnerability. Among the most significant things he revealed was his health. For years, members had wondered quietly whether Bishop Jones had the stamina to keep leading with the same intensity. Videos and eyewitness reports often showed him fighting through exhaustion, at times even appearing frail at 68 years old. He finally admitted what many had already noticed, that his body could no longer keep pace with the constant demands of pastoring a megachurch, traveling and preaching with the same fiery intensity he had always been known for. But his admission went deeper than just physical health. Bishop Jones also spoke about the emotional and mental weight of ministry. Decades of leadership, counseling, and being constantly in the spotlight had left him drained in ways he seldom shared. He acknowledged that there were seasons when the burden felt crushing and moments when he questioned whether he had the strength to go on. For those who had suspected he carried hidden struggles behind his public strength, this became a moment of truth. Another layer of his revelation centered on legacy. Bishop Jones admitted that in this stage of his life, much of his reflection was about how he would ultimately be remembered. Would people look back and see him as a preacher who gave everything, or as someone who clung on for too long? Would his story be marked by the power of his sermons or by the controversies and unanswered questions that had followed his ministry? What his confirmation revealed was that these weren't only questions posed by outsiders. They were questions he himself had been asking all along. Then came the most personal part of his admission. Bishop Jones openly acknowledged that his personal life had long been a subject of speculation and critique throughout his ministry. He admitted that remaining unmarried for so many years and living in a way that didn't fit the traditional mold of a pastor created both confusion and controversy. For years, people assumed this was a point of tension for him, and at 68, he finally confirmed it. He recognized that while his choices were his own, they had fueled much of the suspicions surrounding him. For many, hearing him openly confirm these truths was both startling and refreshing. Startling because such honesty is rare from a leader of his stature. Refreshing because it finally gave clarity to what people had long felt but never heard him say. Bishop Jones wasn't a man trying to project perfection. He was a man acknowledging his humanity, his flaws, and the realities of carrying leadership for nearly 50 years. But here's where the story takes on even greater weight. His confirmation didn't diminish his ministry, it strengthened it. By admitting what so many already suspected, Bishop Noel Jones demonstrated that transparency itself could be a form of leadership. In a world where countless scandals erupt because leaders bury the truth until it eventually explodes, Jones instead chose to own his story before it became one. Still, his openness also sparked new questions. Would this mean retirement? Would he finally pass the mantle of leadership to someone else? Or was this simply the beginning of reshaping the way he ministered? In his later years? Those questions lead us into the next chapter of this story, the aftermath of his revelation, and how both his congregation and the broader community responded to this moment of truth. Because while one chapter of speculation came to a close, another chapter, a chapter of transition, had only just begun. When Bishop Noel Jones finally confirmed what many had long believed about his ministry, the ripple effects were immediate. His admission wasn't only about himself. It rippled through his congregation, the broader Christian community, and even among his critics. For a man whose voice had carried global influence, this display of raw honesty was nothing short of seismic. Inside his church, the city of Refuge, reactions were mixed but deeply emotional. Longtime members who had walked with him for decades sat in stunned silence, some with tears streaming down their faces. Many later admitted they weren't surprised by his confession. They had sensed the heavy weight he bore, but hearing him finally acknowledge it aloud gave them a different perspective. For them, it was both heartbreaking and healing. Heartbreaking because it signaled the beginning of change. Healing because their pastor had at last spoken openly about the struggles they had only imagined. Younger members of the congregation, especially those who had only ever known him as a towering figure of strength, experienced this as a wake-up call to them. Bishop Jones had always seemed untouchable, almost superhuman in the way he preached powerfully week after week. His confirmation reminded them that even spiritual leaders are human, vulnerable, and bound by the same limitations as everyone else. That realization stirred deeper respect in some, while also igniting a measure of fear. What would become of The church without Bishop Jones guiding it? The reaction quickly spilled beyond the church walls. On social media, clips of his admission spread rapidly across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thousands shared their thoughts, often with strong emotions. Some praised his transparency, holding it up as an example for pastors who conceal their struggles until it's too late. Others, however, viewed his words as validation of long-standing criticisms, claiming he had been leading on borrowed time for years. The comments captured a larger tension in how the public views megachurch leaders, admired for their gifts, but consistently scrutinized for their humanity, across the wider Christian community, especially among pastors and leaders. Bishop Jones's admission sparked meaningful conversations. Many acknowledged that they too felt the same pressures, the same exhaustion, and the same anxieties about legacy. Some even admitted that his openness gave them the courage to be more transparent with their own congregations. Still, others worried about the precedent it might set, questioning whether exposing such vulnerabilities could weaken the authority and trust pastors depend on to lead effectively. For critics who had long believed Bishop Jones was concealing something, his words felt like vindication. They pointed to this moment as proof that their doubts had been justified. Yet even among critics, there was an undertone of respect, because while many leaders wait until scandal forces them to speak, Bishop Jones chose to face the truth voluntarily. Perhaps the most profound reactions, though, came from those outside the church entirely. Secular observers and people who had walked away from organized religion watched closely. To them, Bishop Jones represented something bigger, the impossible expectations placed on spiritual leaders. His confirmation in their eyes was a reminder that no one, not even the most eloquent preacher, can shoulder the weight of perfection. For some, it became a moment of empathy. For others, it only reinforced their skepticism of the mega-church model. The aftermath wasn't only about the reactions, it was about the actions that followed. Almost right away, discussions started swirling around succession planning within the church. Would Bishop Jones personally appoint a successor? Would he shift into more of a mentorship role, guiding the younger pastors while stepping away from the pulpit? Or would he continue to preach but on a lighter schedule, recognizing his limitations while still lending his voice? These were the questions the church community was eager, almost desperate to have answered. And here's where the story took another turn. While Bishop Jones admitted to the struggles that many had already suspected, he stopped short of giving clear direction about his next moves. That lack of certainty stirred up a new round of speculation. What would the future of City of Refuge look like without the man who had turned it into a spiritual powerhouse? Could the church weather such a transition, or would it splinter apart like so many other ministries have when their founding leaders stepped down? The answers to those questions wouldn't come quickly. But one thing was undeniable: Bishop Noel Jones had altered the conversation by speaking the truth. He pushed not only his congregation, but the wider faith community to confront the realities of leadership, aging, and the heavy cost of carrying influence for so many years. And yet, as powerful as his confirmation and its aftermath were, another chapter still remained. Because what Bishop Jones revealed about his ministry at 68 was never only about himself. It spoke to a greater truth, one that touches every leader, every church, and every believer who has ever placed their trust in someone standing behind the pulpit.